absolutely clear to Putin that this type of action is unacceptable to the entire international community. We believe this unity, this overwhelming consensus of objection to this kind of conduct is the best way to prevent the expansion of the war.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Eric Naki out of South Africa, participating in a listening party. You may ask your question. I'm sorry, Eric's question is in our Q&A. Eric writes, he's from the Citizen in Johannesburg. What is your view regarding South Africa's abstention at the United Nations General Assembly regarding the Russian vote? I'll ask that question one more time. The question is from Eric Naki. Eric Naki from the Citizen in Johannesburg. What is your view regarding South Africa's abstention at the United Nations General Assembly regarding the Russian vote?
Thanks very much, Marissa. Sorry, I had a problem with my my buttons here. I'm going to quote Secretary Blinken, who said yesterday that we are not going to parse the individual votes. He noted that in some cases an abstention actually speaks loudly itself as opposed to a no vote. And he suggested that in these instances we need to look at the individual countries, assess the relationship with Russia, and vote it, and look at how they voted in that context. So I think the bigger story is that we again had what is pretty much a historic vote count, 141 votes for the resolution, and I'm sure that Russia will hear the abstention. They understand that does not mean support for their actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Ephraim Keoram, who is participating in a listening party in Botswana. Ephraim, please state your name and your affiliation. You may ask your question. Please ask your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Swift from Gabs FM in Botswana. I wanted to ask, what is the position of the US on censoring of social media and the complete wipeout of the other party, in this case, obviously, Russia, since free speech and free press is the cornerstone not only of democracy, but a tool that can create a counterculture or counter narrative?
Swift, thanks for raising that question. That is a tension that we are all grappling with, but I believe it's very clear to African audiences, as it is to us here in the United States, that Russian conduct in the social media space is not free and fair. In fact, they right now are shutting down their own media outlets for their own citizens. We've also seen an abuse of social media with bots to distort dialogue and conversation. We saw that in our 2016 elections here in the United States. So I think it's very clear that Russian behaviors in this space do not promote freedom of speech, and so it's appropriate for us to respond.
Thank you. Next, we will go live to Simon Ateba of Today News Africa. Mr. Ateba, you may ask your question.
Thank you, Ambassador, for taking my question. This is Simon Ateba with Today News Africa in Washington, D.C. You just mentioned a report about Africans facing racism in Ukraine and Poland, being denied entry into trains in Kiev, and being turned back at the border with Poland. Is there any reason why the State Department has not publicly condemned racism against Africans in Ukraine and Poland? And how do you counter the argument that it's not in the interest of Ukraine to be part of NATO, just like it's not in the interest of the US to allow North Korea or Iran to have nuclear bombs? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, and it's nice to hear your voice. I hope you follow my Twitter account because you will have seen statements by me, also reflecting statements by the Ukrainian foreign minister, rejecting racism in the treatment of African students in Ukraine. So absolutely, we have, that's very clear, I think, to you, if you live in Washington, that the Biden administration, Secretary Blinken, me personally, none of us support racism, and we call it out wherever we see it. On the issue of NATO, the issue is simple. It should be the choice of a sovereign country to choose which alliances they wish to participate in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to a question sent in to us from Mr. Malik Suleimana of the Ghanaian Times in Ghana. His question is, do you think the war between Ukraine and Russia has long-term impact on Ghana's economy? So we can expand this to several economies on the African continent.
I think it's hard to say today what the long-term impacts will be. We can speculate together. We have not given up on the diplomatic path. We would prefer, and it has always been our preference, that there would be a diplomatic solution to this conflict. That is why we so strongly oppose the use of unprovoked violence against the Ukrainians. There is a lot of discussion about how this action is affecting political alliances. It is affecting sort of the relationships between the great powers. There is acknowledgement that there are immediate impacts, as we've discussed, on the fuel and commodity sectors. But there are also ongoing efforts by the United States and other international partners to take steps to stabilize energy prices, to improve supply chains, to maybe develop new African supply chains to Europe, new relationships. So I think it's fair to say there might be a reordering of economic engagement, but it's hard today to know conclusively how that will play out.
Thank you. We'll stay in Ghana and go to Diana Ngon of City FM TV. The question is, how is this going to impact economic development on the continent? So you've already answered that a bit. And is the world ready to deal with this, especially considering the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic? So if I can expand on this a bit, essentially sort of all these things are part of the Biden administration's Africa strategy, the COVID trade, combating COVID, trade and investment, peace and security and democracy. How is the U.S. government going to be able to do all of this now with this war on top of all of those goals?
It's natural for all of us to be concerned about how this aggression by Putin is going to affect not only our friends in Europe, but all of us because of the interconnectedness of the international community. I want to confirm and reassure you that the United States remains deeply committed to continuing to help Africans cope with the COVID pandemic, both in the medical space, making sure that you have vaccines. We have doubled our efforts to get vaccines out to you so that everyone can be vaccinated. So if there is another variant of COVID, we're all better protected. We're working to help Africans, including in Ghana, develop production facilities for vaccines. We remain committed to our work to promote trade and investment in Africa from the United States and African trade with Americans to help develop your economies and create jobs. We also remain committed to doing what we can to promote an end to conflict on your continent, and we remain supportive in the humanitarian space, addressing Africans who are suffering from conflict in the continent. We remain interested in helping you deal with the impact of climate change and supporting protection of your natural resources so that they can be used by you and can contribute to a better environment for the entire community. So we are not going to change our policy. We remain interested in continuing to elevate and deepen our partnership You should be reassured that the crisis in Europe will not affect our goals and our engagement.
All right, we're going to go back to the listening party that's being hosted at the U.S. Embassy in Gaborone, Botswana, for their question. Botswana, please ask your question.
Hello, yes, this is Stefano Isaacs from Making News. I wanted to ask, why should African countries support the position of the U.S. to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine when the U.S. supports the aggression in Israel against Palestinians?
Thanks for that question. I would say you're not supporting the position of the U.S. That is our position, but it is the position of the majority of the international community. There's near universal support in Europe, and there's also near universal support in Latin America and in East Asia and in Central Asia and the Middle East. You've seen most of the world come together because they recognize that this kind of naked aggression, unprovoked, brutal assault on the civilians of Ukraine is not acceptable anywhere in the world. So we believe it's appropriate for African governments and countries to choose to support the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty and protection of civilians. And we hope you will join the rest of the international community, because that is the best way to put pressure on Putin to end this senseless and tragic war.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Togo. This question is from Joël Dadzi from the quotidien Liberté out of Togo. Question is it true that there is an agreement between Russia and the United States that the United States does not want to respect? And what exactly are you asking of African countries?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, but there is no secret agreement between the United States and Russia. What we are saying, and again, this is our position, but we believe it should be the position of all free nations in the world, that it is critical that we stand together right now and speak with one voice to reject this type of aggression. I think you are all journalists. You can watch on TV, online, on radio. You can hear the voices of the Ukrainian people. You can see what's happening. You would not want that to happen in your country. That's the principle at stake. Nobody wants that to happen to their home and community, and we should stand up against it wherever we see it. Thanks.
Thank you. The next question came to us from the Q&A from Peter Fabricius of the Daily Maverick in South Africa. What else should African countries do to express their disapproval of the invasion of Ukraine? Should they boycott the Russia-African Summit in St. Petersburg? And do you see Ukraine ever regaining its independence? And if so, when?
Marissa, I think it's important for all of us to look for ways to show our support for the Ukrainian people, whether that is a vote in the United Nations, whether that is a decision to decline to engage with Russia until Putin changes his country's behavior. Everyone should be exploring what is possible. If you look at what the international community is doing, you've seen unprecedented reaction. For example, major oil companies decline to engage with Moscow. You've seen major airlines refuse to allow Russian airplanes to fly to their countries. You've seen orchestras or other cultural groups refuse to engage with Russians until this aggression ends. So I think there's no one way to stand up for the Ukrainian people. There are many ways, and it's up to each country to decide how to move forward.
We have time for one more, possibly two. We'll see. The next question comes from Vidya Gathi from the Seychelles. Question is a concern for small island states. Our government is regularly updating us on the economic impact, as we are heavily dependent on tourism coming from both Russia and Ukraine. At this moment, we do not need to take sides, but we do need to see how small island states and small countries will suffer from this war. Will the U.S. be looking into that like the World Bank and other institutions are doing?
Thank you for the question, and also thank you for the decision of the Seychelles to vote for the General Assembly resolution to stand with the majority of the international community in rejecting this aggression. I expect, we just talked about decisions individuals and countries are taking to protest Russian action. I expect positive decisions. So for example, decisions by tourists to choose the Seychelles to demonstrate solidarity. In terms of actions we can take to support small economies, you saw during the COVID pandemic, we worked with the World Bank and the IMF to provide special resources to countries in Africa that were suffering the economic consequences of the pandemic. There's now a discussion underway on how to continue to help countries that will be suffering from the economic dislocations of this conflict. Again, it's early in the conflict. We would prefer if we all stand firmly and try and deter an expansion of the conflict. We might be able to recover sooner, but those are activities and assistance that we can explore developing and assisting those who stood up for principles and for the people.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. Assistant Secretary Fee, do you have any final remarks?
Thank you very much, Marissa, and thank you to everyone who joined this call and who asked such thoughtful and constructive questions. I just want to emphasize what I said at the start. You matter. Africa matters. And we want you to join the rest of the international community because unity at this moment in time is the most effective way we can return to peace and stability. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to engaging with you in the future.
That is all the time we have for today. That concludes today's briefing. I would like to thank Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Molly Fee, for speaking with us today, and thank all of our journalists for participating. If you have any questions about today's briefing, you may contact the Africa Regional Media Hub at afmediahub@state.gov. Thank you.
All right. With that kind of concludes the telephonic press briefing. What we'd like to do now, this is a good moment, if anybody wants to get a drink or get any food so that we don't have all this food left at the end of this, please help yourselves.
There's also 2 bathrooms.
Yes, and there are 2 bathrooms right off to the side here that you're welcome to use as needed. So now we're going to begin our kind of on-the-record chat portion. Sharjah Haskell, with all due respect, protocol-wise, Ambassador Brabantova will go second. So I'd like to begin with a couple of remarks from you, and then Ambassador Brabantova, if you would like to make any remarks, and then we will open it up to questions. I unfortunately do not know all of your names, so I'm going to try to not point, but graciously indicate who's going to ask a question. As you begin, I'd like you to please state your name and your media outlet with whom you're affiliated. Ask your question. Again, as in the press briefing, try to just ask one question, please, and kind of get to the point so that everybody kind of has a chance to ask whatever they like. With that, sir, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, David. I'm just going to say a couple of things because I'm actually interested in getting to the questions. But I think one thing we've all been shaken by the events in Ukraine, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, Russia's unprovoked attacks against Ukraine, even far away in South Africa, as the Assistant Secretary was saying on the phone call, we're a globalized world now, and this affects all of us. This affects all of us. But let's be clear what we're looking. We're looking at an unprovoked attack by Russia against Ukraine, a war against the democratic government in Ukraine, an effort to territorial aggrandizement. It's a war against democracy, and it threatens all of us. We all support a negotiated solution to this, an end to it, but Russia chose the other way. As the UN Security Council was actually debating this issue, is when President Putin announced his plans to invade, and the war started soon after. It demonstrated that, it showed that Putin considered the diplomatic process a farce. It was just a scam, an effort to buy time while he moved ready to get his troops into place and attack. If we can get to a negotiated solution, that would be terrific. But right now, we're looking at not just a gun at Ukraine's head, but tanks in their streets, planes flying over their cities, dropping bombs. It's a terrible outrage of what we're seeing going on there. So I think it's important, as the Assistant Secretary said, that Africa shows its voice at a time like this. More than ever, Africa matters. More than ever, Africa matters. And there is a moral responsibility, as Desmond Tutu used to say, that in the fight between the oppressor and the oppressed, choosing not to take sides is taking sides and siding with the oppressor. That's a thought that inspired me as a young man, and I hope his words will continue to inspire Africans across the continent. Let me ask if the ambassador wants to add some words.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your attention and coming today for this event. The 8th day in a row, Ukrainians bravely are standing very strong in front of one of the biggest armies in the world, in front of the biggest country in the world. And we're standing today not only for our sovereignty and our land, we are standing for the main principles of international law, of the UN Charter. And that is why, again, let me also repeat it, and we want you to clearly hear us, that particularly today, the voice of each African country matters and shows a lot. And depending on how quick we will react on this aggression and how united we will be, will depend how strong the effect of this war will be on each particular country and on all the world in general. As soon as we stop this aggression, the easier consequences would be. I also would prefer maybe to go to the straight questions. We already heard a lot of answers with which really find also the same answers in my mind. So let's see what can come out from your questions.
Okay, so raise your hand if you have a question. I'll call you and just say your name and your outlet. Yep, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Golden Whittles from eNCA. Mr. Ascoff, you just said that not taking sides is taking sides of the oppressor that famous Desmond Tutu quote. You believe South Africa's policy of non-alignment is, by default, then taking sides with Russia?
I guess I believe what I said. I think that this is a conflict between, it's clear, it's naked aggression. I recall hearing a Ukrainian person in the media saying if Russia laid down its arms tomorrow, it would be the end of the war. But if Ukraine laid down its arms tomorrow, it would be the end of Ukraine. Russia's chosen this war. This is not a situation where both sidesism, and we need to, I think there is a moral duty on behalf of the international community and countries across the world. And my belief in that kind of thing, let's be clear, is inspired by the history of South Africa. That as a young man, as a college student, looking across the sea and seeing the way South Africans were standing up and the moral demands that were on the rest of the world to also stand up in a battle between an oppressor and an oppressed person. So I know that South Africa is founded on these principles, and I am saddened when South Africa does not live up fully to those principles. No country is perfect. The United States has made serious mistakes. I think if you were to ask President Biden or Secretary Blinken about the last 20 years of our history, they'd be very clear about, in their critique of the Iraq War, in their critique of a lot of different things that we've done. So I'm not saying that any country is perfect, but I would urge my South African friends to name the oppressor here and to not try to just sit on the fence.
Yes?
My name is Tanya Mayaka from Business Daily.
Mhm.
So in yesterday's UN General Assembly vote, it was not only South Africa that abstained, but other Southern African countries that abstained. Do you think this indicates that talks between Ukraine and the other Southern African states regarding the Russian invasion of Russia failed? And it also indicates that the Southern African states have taken a stance of a neutral stance to Russia. Do you think the states should take a more cautious stance against Russia, especially considering the historical ties between Southern Africa and Russian states?
And you're addressing the question to me.
Yes, to both of them.
Okay. Do you want to
Shall I
start?
start?
Yes.
First of all, the yesterday's vote does have a very positive shift that you can see, and a number of countries that voted in favor, and some of them that always voted against or abstained. I'm speaking about Zimbabwe, for example. We must understand that Russia, which took the legacy of the USSR, is strongly following the narrative of its importance in countries of Southern Africa and generally in Africa in their struggle with colonialism, in South Africa particularly, apartheid, and that brings a strong sentiment towards Russia and some kind of obligation towards Russia. And I think this is the main reason why those countries that abstained did abstain.
Yeah, I would just say, look, the main takeaway from the vote is 144 countries voted for the resolution. 141 voted for the resolution, 5 voted against. This was a tremendous defeat for Russia and for what it's been doing. And it's the whole world came together. And I'll echo what the ambassador said. I mean, a lot of countries that traditionally vote with Russia all the time abstain this time. So I wouldn't take away that this has been a failure of those who supported the resolution to make the case. If anything, this is a tremendous victory. It's the world coming together almost in an unprecedented manner to condemn aggressive actions by a member country.
I getting to see freelance journalist. I have a question for each of you. The one is, the one question is the reason why South Africa didn't remained abstained from supporting the resolution. I think it's complex, and I think there's some trust issues involved as well. If you look at what happened with NATO when we supported NATO's no-fly zone over Libya, I think there were some unintended consequences, and I think South Africa's asking, if we trust you again on this one, are you going to mess it up again? I think that's one of the issues. And I'm just wondering, how do you get past trust issues like that? I mean, is that one of the things that you consider when you lobby South Africa for support? And is there perhaps another way of going about, because I mean, I know that South African government is opposed to the violence in the Ukraine, to the tanks, to I mean, they're morally opposed to that, but there's some other background issues, trust with Western partners. How do you resolve that?
Well, look, I think in general we have a very positive and productive relationship with South Africa across a number of issues. And we will continue to work with South Africans, obviously, on all of these issues that mean a lot to us. We have a tremendously positive relationship in health. We have a tremendously positive relationship in terms of energy moving forward. Our trade relationship is enormous. Americans are among the leading investors in South Africa. Our tons of tourism. We are now the leading source of tourists to come to South Africa. Many South Africans get to visit the United States. The ties between our two countries are incredibly strong. On this issue, we disagree, and I think what we need to do is continue our dialogue with South Africa, conversations. I'm speaking to people at DIRCO all the time. People at DIRCO are speaking to me all the time, and I think we learn a lot moving forward. Clearly, as you've alluded to, there have been foreign policy issues in the past we haven't agreed on, but I think we've come a tremendously long way, and we're going to continue to engage. This is an extremely important relationship for the United States with South Africa, and it's one that we value very much.
Thank you. Clearly,
Sorry, she's got one more question for
But I don't know-
You asked both of us, right? So I was just...
Yeah, sorry, I had a question for each of you, but maybe...
Oh, that was the
Okay,
question
sorry,
for
go
me.
ahead.
Okay,
Go ahead.
please.
But you could...
Maybe
If you both feel like answering. But no, the question I have is about Ukrainian refugees. There's, staggering amount of people fleeing the country right now. Are you in talks with African countries to perhaps help relieve that refugee burden? Is there anything Africa can offer in that regard?
first of all, when such the conditions are happening of any catastrophe or war in the world, then every country faces not only the flow of refugees, but also some migrational problems, such as the Ukrainians visiting certain countries who cannot go back to their homes anymore, or those who are permanently or temporarily working on the territory of certain foreign state and they have their families that stayed without any shelter. And there must be a process of communication and negotiation with each particular country in this world on how we are going to assist those migrants. And moreover, each country in the world which supports this humanic values can consider the possibility of receiving a number of people from Ukraine to their territories. So we did do official step, we did request it, such an assistance from South African governments through the diplomatic channels, yes. So we expect for the answer.
Kaya?
It's Kaya here from SABC News.
Good to see you again.
Lovely. So I just wanted to know so far, so you say African voices do matter, and also I just want to understand so far in terms of the impact from the continent. What can you say to the Africans so that they really do understand how interconnected we are, with SWIFT and many other things? So what can you say just to emphasize that issue, that what happens in Ukraine may have implications here? And maybe just to you, Ambassador, obviously, a lot of people have been commiserating with you, but those very ugly scenes by the Polish border where some migrants were ill-treated, how has that affected, how people are seeing what's happening in Ukraine? And obviously we've seen a response where you have categorically rejected what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me start. Thank you, Kaya, for this question, and this is very important to speak about it. First of all, in the periods of chaos and unexpected chaos, unexpected attack, unexpected war, you cannot predict where the flows of migrants will be, what challenges they are going to face. The coordination is not established on the first days of such circumstances. And that's where you are starting to have these complaints and these problems. And it is a problem. And we recognize that we were not prepared, as well as was not prepared the Embassy of South Africa, for example, in Ukraine, for the evacuation or for the assistance for their foreigners or for the foreigners of the region who live in Ukraine. And believe me that till today, on the 8th day of the war, we still don't have any single humanitarian corridor. So this affects the informational environment, but it not affects the friendship between our states, And if we look back into the history not only of independent Ukraine but of the Ukraine within USSR times, you will see a lot of African students traditionally studied in Ukraine. So there is not a place or platform for any non-inclusiveness of Ukrainian society. And the best proof of that, I think, is that last year we had 16,000 African students in Ukraine studying. And I'm talking to them now when your ambassador is on his way out of Ukraine, he is evacuating, and someone has to assist them. And I ask them, tell me, do you really feel like you've been, because the stories are there, and I mean the tradition of Russian disinformation and their war and making the narrative out of that, it's also very big. And it has its impact, and we feel it. So I will not allow to speak about my country being racist if it's never been a fact of that, and I can prove it. Thank you.
If I understood your question about African voices mattering, for me, I mean, clearly we're all here. This is happening across the continent. American diplomats are engaging with press to have conversations like this because we do deeply care. And even at the highest levels of the U.S. government, I can speak most intelligently about South Africa because I live here now. There has been frequent high-level engagement between the secretary and the minister, between both our presidents, at all levels across. This is real recognition that in the new century, as it moves on, Africa is playing a larger and larger role, and the world expects that of a rising power, which is the continent here. And this is, in many ways, the generation of young Africans that are coming up are the most educated, the smartest. They have access to tools like this that they can communicate with the rest of the world. Africa is entering upon the world scene, and that is a pillar of our foreign policy around the world, that we have to engage more with Africa, and it's a real force in international affairs.
Yes.
Hi, Amanda Koza from the Sunday Times. I just want to go back to the aid. Is the ambassador able to tell us what exactly do you need South Africa to do to assist the situation back home?
Thank you. So there are different tracks. And we speak both about assistance with receiving Ukrainians on the territories of countries of the region, particularly in South Africa, but also because of the real war and indiscriminate shelling and bombing of our territories. We have a lot of damage, not on infrastructure that's shown now in the news, but these are ordinary people who are injured or dying, or they are blocked by Russian troops. They don't have access to food, to basic needs. So all of that is needed. Any possible assistance, of course financial assistance, is needed and will be needed even more after the end of the war, because country completely destroyed. So anything that you can imagine. And don't forget that today in Ukraine is the coldest month of the year. It's still winter. So you can imagine that these people who are leaving the country, they also might need a lot of assistance.
Sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
Junior Kumari from News 24. You had indicated earlier that you wanted South Africa to come out and say who the aggressor is. Initially, our minister had indicated that Russia should step out, and that was a clear indication of who the aggressor is. But she had to backtrack because of the policies of the ruling party. What were your thoughts on that?
You know, the only thing actually I've seen is an official statement from Gierko beyond, press reports. And I never, as much as I appreciate the press, I usually prefer official statements. I haven't actually seen that statement ever officially walked back. DIRCO called for the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops and an end to the combat. And I'll take that at their word. Like I said, I'll continue to assume that's the position of South Africa until they enunciate a different position. I have seen different positions from the ANC and from different politicians within the ANC, but the only official statement I've seen on this has been that one. And I was listening to the radio yesterday morning, and I heard the spokesperson for DIRCO reaffirm that that was still the position and not to pay attention to Sunday Times articles. So, so I will, with all respect, so I will take that at their word.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for the other opportunity. We've now called on South Africa to name the oppressors, essentially asking them to move beyond the policy of non-alignment. Does the United States envision any consequences for South Africa's if they stay with their current position?
Consequences from the United States?
Yeah, with the trade relationship that we have?
No.
None at all. And then I'd just like to ask whether, do you view the decision by South Africa's multi-choice to suspend the Russia Today channel as multi-choice in South Africa being a victim of the sanctions that have been applied on Russia, since multi-choice says they did it because the feed was cut? Or do you welcome the move as being in support of the people of Ukraine and one of those gestures that the Assistant Secretary said?
Yeah, I almost feel uncomfortable talking about that because I'm not sure what the decision making was on that. I'll be honest, I don't watch Russia Today, so I'm not missing it. But I don't know, necessarily want to answer that question in detail.
Other questions? Yeah, you had another one? No, hold on 1 second. Yes, go ahead.
Mary Duffy from Business Day. Just a quick question to the ambassador on the ties between Ukraine and South Africa. Are there trade, investment, economic or other ties to speak of?
We had ups and downs in our relations, and we have to remember that both our countries are relatively young in their democracies. South Africa is building its beautiful country since 1994, is democratic Ukraine since 1991. So it's something that was growing up to the time when we had the actual Russian invasion in 2014. We must not forget that the war started not 8 days ago, it started in 2014. And it didn't help to our bilateral relations. The narratives of war in Ukraine were not clear in South Africa, which I mean also hidden a lot of opportunities for both sides. And another way around, the picture of South Africa in Ukrainian media not always reflects the desire of Ukrainian businesses to come and invest in this country. That was the story, pre-story of that. Then COVID, when COVID came, it came simultaneously with the decision of the president to face its strategy of foreign policy towards African countries, and COVID didn't help again, and now we have this situation. I believe that there is a huge room of opportunities, and maybe I will say not the very popular thing, but even this terrible war, unprecedented war that is happening now against Ukraine, it put Ukraine on the map. And it shows the importance of Ukraine not only for all the world but South Africa as well. We just saw the recent statistics when people are starting to speak about what will be the consequences of this war for the food security, for example, and when the world understands that the 5% of global production of commodities and agriculture are coming from Ukraine, then you understand the importance of this country. And you look at the map and you realize, okay, this is the biggest country in Europe. And it's big in agriculture, and it was doing its input in our economy here in South African and African countries. Just it was not obvious. Now it's obvious.
Anything else?
Could I ask another?
Absolutely, that's fine.
I just want to ask you, Georgia, how's your former president doing? I see that he said the war would never have happened if he was still president. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, you know, I know that there's some questions are better not answered. I'm going to just say that the American people and President Biden are strong supporters of Ukraine's sovereignty and are doing what we can to seek a solution that will bring peace back to the region.
Sure.
Thank you once again. I just want to get a clearer answer and put the question more directly. So what is the US's attitude towards South Africa's policy of non-alignment at the moment? Are you asking us to change it and to condemn the Russian occupation of Ukraine? Are you lobbying people right now to change their position?
Okay, well, just quickly, I mean, non-alignment is this Cold War concept. Non-alignment doesn't mean the same thing as neutrality, even during the Cold War. Non-alignment means that a country follows its issues and its values and chooses its decision without necessarily aligning it with one side or the other. But we're still looking back in the past. I hope I've made clear, and let me try to make clear again, that the United States and South Africa have a multifaceted and extremely productive relationship. And that means when we have disagreements, we have forums to discuss these and have dialogue on it and talk about it. And that is our policy on this issue as well. We feel very strongly about this. And to be honest, let's be clear, we agree with a lot about this situation with South Africa. Both of us are seeking a pathway to a peaceful solution that is based around dialogue. I think Minister Pandor and the President Ramaphosa have been really clear about that, and that's certainly our position. Where we differ, I suppose, is almost in a tactical way, is that we feel it's important to name the oppressor in this particular situation, to name the aggressor, the one who is carrying out this unprovoked attack. And we continue to dialogue with the South Africans, as friends do, and South Africa makes its points to us, and we make our points to South Africa. But no one is insisting that anyone agree with anyone else. This is about us having a dialogue with the South Africans about how we can move forward. And that dialogue, I can tell you, is ongoing. It is polite, and it's diplomatic, and it's extremely important.
We're going to lose Sharjah Haskell here in a minute because he's got a meeting.
That's right, I have to do that.
Yes, you do. But he'll be back in 10 minutes or so.
I just have a call with Washington about a completely different issue.
Yeah,
but I have to be away for about 10 or 15 minutes. Thank you, guys.
So, I would, in the meantime, are you willing to take a couple more questions?
Yes,
okay.
please.
Okay. Do we have any other questions for Ambassador Babatova at this time?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Ambassador, could you just kindly expand on the request by Ukraine for South Africa to house Ukrainian refugees or other African countries to house Ukrainian refugees? You briefly mentioned that. Could you just expand on what has been discussed through the diplomatic channels, when the discussions began, and at what stage of the discussions right now?
Well, such requests usually are proceeding through the diplomatic channels. So the embassy requested the DIRCO to receive, if there will be requests from Ukraine, those citizens who would want to come without any particular visa regime. Moreover, those citizens who are staying on the territory of South Africa now and whose visa are expiring, they should have received some support from the government of South Africa to have the prolongations or automatic prolongations. This is not something new. This is something that we see through all the world that other governments are doing in critical situation like this. And of course, for those families to reunite if they have relatives in Ukraine, and these Ukrainians are working here, that they would be able to receive in South Africa their member families. This is basically it. Also, there is a lot of other issues that are coming in terms of legislation and migration across, because you must understand that the infrastructure was completely destroyed. Even the facilities of production of passports for Ukrainians are destroyed. And people who have their passports not valid anymore, they have to be able to receive their documents and to be able to travel. And this is also something that we have to issue now, to address now, and to discuss with the governments of the countries where we are responsible. So the president took the decision that we will be able make a prolongation of the passports of Ukrainians for extra 5 years in written form, putting the stamp of the embassy, or those children who were born now or who have their passports expired, they can be included in the passport of the parents. This is the maximum that we can do today for our people, and we are doing best.
We have time for just a couple more questions, because I know Ambassador Brapatova has to go to another engagement. Kai, did you have one more?
Ambassador, I just wanted to get just a clarity. I mean, obviously we do have Moscow saying that they want to denazify Ukraine. Is it like a big issue in Ukraine? Like how, like in terms of your gauging, is it like a big issue, or is it just another issue that they're raising?
You know, Ukraine is a democratic country with very open media and informational environment. And I would encourage you to check through different internet sources the existence on the territory of Ukraine of any kind of such organizations. And meantime, please check it within Russian media and Russian environment in information. And you will see that they do have fascists and Nazist organizations which recently were not allowed, but those people who were following these ideas, they are still there. So we say in Ukrainian, don't put from the weak head to the healthy head any issue. We never had it. And even if you look at the political structure of our parliament, it's very interesting that in having 300 plus different political parties, people don't vote for far right or far left. We don't have in the parliament those parties. Does it say something to you?
I think we have time for one more question. Okay. All right, go ahead.
Ambassador, what do you think is going to happen next in the current conflict?
There are two things. What I think and what I cannot predict. What I want to think and what I cannot predict. And the reality shows us that we cannot predict the actions of one particular person alarming his nuclear weapons against all the world. Why we say that we have to stay strong and united in the response with all the African countries. It's not a joke. It's threatening to not only Ukraine or Europe or to the United States. It's threatening to all the world. So the thing that I would want to see, and I expect, is that these sanctions that are provided today towards Russia, the main goal is isolation. The isolation must bring the understanding to the people of Russia, to those who are electing this particular government and president, to the decision whether they want to live in such conditions under the autocrat management and being, let me try being very emotionally, not to follow the diplomatic language, and being not to brainwashed. Maybe they will understand that 10,000 soldiers that they lost today are someone's someone's fathers, someone's sons. Maybe they will stand up all together and they will decide where they want to belong. And I think that all these sanctions are about this. It's not to punish the world. It's not to support Ukraine. It's just to finally live in the peaceful world when no one is threatening us with nuclear missiles.
Okay. So we're going to conclude now. I think Ambassador Bravatova does have to go off to another engagement. I think Sharjah Haskell will be back. I know a couple of you wanted to do stand-up interviews, but I do need to respect Ambassador Bravatova's time because she has to get down to Johannesburg. So with that, I know
Thank you very much.
Stand-up. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
I will take my water with me, if you don't mind.
Thank you so much.